It's so sad that this is one of the last Frieren Fridays. Because, FYI, next week is the final episode. And it's just crazy, man. What a journey. What a journey that this anime has been. And it's really fitting, Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And this little segment here, we're just getting to see what inspires Frieren to be a mage and why she loves magic and one of her favorite spells. This is just such a beautiful sequence that really just ties back into everything when it comes to just what the story is about, to the fundamentals and magic of magic, and just like what, Himmel had on our, to our characters, like what he meant to our characters, what he meant to Frieren, and how he changed her life forever, despite him only living like a blip in Frieren's life. He will forever have just such a massive impact on her, and just this little segment here is just so important, and I absolutely love it. And it really hurts to know that this is basically like the second to the last Friday. For instance, next week, when, Friday rolls around, it will be the final episode. And I know there is like 100 something chapters or so of Frieren. I don't know necessarily how much content is left to adapt because I'm not a manga reader. But, I mean, to be fair here, I mean, this is 27 episodes, and there's been a lot of content that we have covered. And so I'm only going to assume that, we're probably going to have to maybe wait for a while for a season 2. Now, I could be wrong there, but I don't think there's probably enough content to, at the very least, make another 20-plus episode season. So, that's pretty sad. I mean, I do think that eventually we will get a season 2. I mean, I feel like Frieren as a anime has just truly popped off. Like, I think its popularity has truly just spoken for itself, because it's like it has made waves in Japan. I've seen a lot of people talk about it, and I think the sales of its series has definitely boosted since its anime. And I mean, the entire staff that's been working on this series has just truly been cooking. But oh my goodness, man, it's truly sad, though. This is like one of the last Fridays of Frieren. Let's talk about the characterization of Frieren, but mainly Serie, aka the teacher of Frieren's master. Someone that has lived for a very long time, even potentially double or triple the amount of time that Frieren has been around. We don't really have an actual estimate, or I think an actual age that Serie is, but regardless, the point of the matter is that this episode gives so much more context to the character, and really just all I can really say is elves are just big tsunderes. But I think that Serie in general is probably the biggest tsundere of them all, at least in a very long time. If there is anyone that really does fit that label, it is definitely that character, or this character here, because everything about the character is just in stark contrast to what is actually going on within the story. And let's talk about that. So, fundamentally, what we know about Serie as a character is that Serie is someone that is a war mage, likes magic, tries to say that humans shouldn't really learn magic, keep it for the elves, etc. We found out about this a few episodes back. And the only reason why, Serie is here is because after, like, over 1,000 years, finally Serie was like, okay, I will, do the wishes of my apprentice and, do what they wanted me to do to teach humans magic, and here she is after all this time. And even though it took over 1,000 years to be able to come to this point, it doesn't change the fact that eventually it did happen. And as we found out from, Frieren's, master, elves, they take a long time to come to decisions. What normally would take a human maybe a week or two, it takes potentially elves hundreds of years to make a simple decision, because they have their time period, their time span closer to eternity than actually just short-lived death. So it's a really interesting concept that obviously plays a big part with just like this episode in general. And we got to see kind of a little bit of a glimpse into Serie's life, but also how Serie is still trying to contemplate and deal with the passing and loss of the people that she loved, aka her apprentice. And let's talk about that. Why am I saying this? Well, when you look at the actions of Serie in this episode, she comes off as a very abrasive, very serious, and a very rude individual. Someone that honestly, if you were a mage, you would not want to be around this person. Even though they know a lot of magic and they definitely know more than probably even Frieren does, you probably wouldn't want to be the apprentice of an individual like this just because of how awful they really seem to be. Like, there's a literal whole segment here at, like, the middle half of the episode where, like, Serie just straight up mocks her new apprentice and all that, saying I shouldn't took a human as a, a pupil, and just pretty much just straight up is rude. It's a very awful thing to say, saying, like, you're not gonna live long and all this, and it's just like, wow, that's kind of mean to say. Basically saying that you shouldn't even ever have taught your apprentice, even though they've dedicated basically most of their entire short life, technically their short life, to you. It's kind of messed up. But in the end, the actions and then what, Serie is actually doing completely are at, odds with each other. And I think that this is a big detail that this episode wants to show, is that Serie is very similar to Frieren, in that Frieren, as I've talked about, is someone that is very stoic. Doesn't show a lot of emotion. She can, but she doesn't usually. Her default expression is just stoic. There is really not much you can really get from her, but sometimes the way the angles of her face are drawn to the way her eyes are drawn, you can understand what she's thinking or the emotion she has. For instance, let's think of Clone Frieren from, the previous episode. And we have seen Frieren's many different emotions and stuff without her really even speaking or even her facial expression changing. It's the way it's presented with the angle and the paneling and just the way the writing is done. You're able to understand what the author is trying to do. Excellent, honestly. I feel like that is a very underrated segment that people talk about or don't talk about. Like, it needs to be talked about more, is because it's like, it's very impressive for a writer to give a character so much emotion without changing their facial structure. That really is a big thing that honestly is impressive. Like, if there's anything that blows me away by Frieren as a series, it is definitely that. And the way the animators and artists that make the anime is able to also convey that in the anime in such a great way, honestly, that also blows my freaking mind. But we're talking about Serie here. The point of the matter is that Serie is very similar to Frieren. At first glance, you might not assume that, because, there is definitely a lot more emotion on Serie's face than Frieren's, because there's always this, like, half smile. You always see, like, this smile or smug grin kind of on Serie's face, and you always get this impression that this person is very arrogant. That's kind of what you get from the overall emotion of this character. They treat themselves as, like, if they really are the pinnacle of magic, they know a lot, and, they just, I don't know, they have this, like, pompous attitude. That's what you get from the character's overall demeanor. And there is a lot of things about this character, though, that, is clearly at odds with that. For instance, there's a lot of frustration and just inadequacy that is underneath the character's, like, exterior. And what I mean by that is the whole segment where she's basically complaining about her apprentice and saying, you're a timid boy, I shouldn't have taught a human. It's not necessarily her taking the anger out on her apprentice, even though it looks like that. She's more or less basically putting her own self down, because she's, for one, upset that she sees so much talent in someone that just cannot live a long lifespan. If they were able to live as long as an elf, for instance, like her, the overall potential of her apprentice would be absolutely astronomical. It would be actually scary. There's a lot of frustration there of just not being able to properly get an apprentice that is able to live for a very long time, but there's just so much potential in humans, and it pains her that they're not able to, like, go to their max potential because just the inevitable of death itself. And you see a lot of that anger within this conversation, but also it's more or less her venting as well about the whole death of her original apprentice, aka Frieren's master, and I feel like this episode kind of showcases that. Like, let's look at this here. The whole final part of the exam is the characters coming into this room, and you see Serie just sitting amongst basically a garden. You see a bunch of flowers and stuff, and I think this is very important, because what is flowers? Well, obviously we know what flowers are, it's a plant, but I'm talking about what is flowers in the essence of in Frieren. What does it mean within this story? Well, this episode definitely wanted to remind us that, flowers, or the spell to make flowers, is Frieren's favorite spell, but also her master's favorite spell. And obviously Serie is very aware of this. She is very well aware of this spell, and she even goes on record to say it's a very useless spell. It is just such a waste, because obviously Serie is a war mage, someone that, just uses magic for the capabilities of power, strength, and defeating others, so to speak. And what's ironic is despite saying all these words, Siri's bodily actions, like for instance, sitting in this garden here next to these flowers, staring at them, and then also giving the test, showcases that even though she's saying these words, in essence, she really does envy those that are able to appreciate flowers, and she is still trying to contemplate and process the loss of her apprentice, and she's grieving. And I think that is what's happening here, because we know elves, they deal with emotions in a very different way. That is what this series is trying to present. They're very slow at it. And knowing that it's been basically 1,000 years, it still isn't like, far-fetched to assume that Serie is still trying to grieve and accept the death of her apprentice. And her even coming into terms and trying to teach humans is more or less her trying to move on and accept the passing of her apprentice. And now these field of flowers also remind her of her apprentice. So I think that's a very big detail that this episode wants to present. And I feel like a lot of the things that she says to Frieren as well is more or less she's trying to be truthful because she wishes Frieren was more like Serie to understand what Serie's thinking. But at the same time, Serie's upset because she can't be like Frieren and appreciate these little things or accept the emotions that Frieren is currently feeling. I don't know. That's just my viewpoint on the matter. It's legitimately an excellent sequence. And also what kind of, really kind of dabbles more into this as well is basically the whole hiding of magic slash mana. Now, we get revealed in this episode that Serie is hiding their mana. And as we know, the reason why mages do that is usually to fool someone. And basically, the reason why Frieren does this is to be able to combat demons. The reason why, Frieren's, master was able to do it was also to combat demons. And I'm assuming the reason why Serie is doing it is not necessarily to be able to combat demons, but more or less to kind of do the exact same thing her apprentice did, and once again, it's another reason of grief. For instance, trying to come to terms with the loss of a loved one, basically her daughter, and grieving in a way, and trying to use the magic that she loved, or tried to do, and understand her to a degree. I think that's what's going on here. But regardless of that, I find it's very interesting, because Serie, once again, says that it's a very useless thing to do. For instance, trying to hide your mana. But she's doing it regardless, which, once again, regardless if I'm misunderstanding the message there, the point is that it shows the contrast or at odds with the overall words she's saying, but also what her actions actually are. So, great episode, honestly. Absolutely amazing episode. We even have this great scene here where, we have, Fern's staff getting fixed, and I think that this is a great moment as well to really demonstrate kind of how Fern's loss of her staff is very important to her, and I'm glad to see this addressed. I didn't think it would actually be addressed, but it was, because, Fern's had that staff since she was a kid, She was basically raised by a man that gave her that staff, and she didn't want to lose that staff. So I'm glad to see that, it wasn't kind of written off, and we didn't get to see any continuation of that. Fern did get a staff, and it got repaired. And it's interesting that Frieren wasn't able to fix it. It's just I'm kind of shocked about that. I legitimately am. But regardless, I think that this also shows another side of emotion too. Is that Frieren, she doesn't know how to process emotion properly. She doesn't understand the weight of an object that someone holds dear to them. But it's ironic that she is like this when she has the earrings of her master literally on her ears, showcasing she does understand the weight of items and belongings to those that they have lost a long time ago. So yeah, just a lot of stuff going on there. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy my content and you enjoyed this video, do leave me a like. It does help me out a lot, and I would greatly appreciate it. But with that, be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.